Can you hear me okay? It's okay. I'm just taking the microphones. How's everyone doing? The weather is good today, alhamdulillah. Every time it's good weather, I say this is probably the last one that we're going to get. And somehow it comes again. But I think this is the last one, inshallah. So, to begin. This better? I think it's old, actually. So to begin, inshallah, I was asked to come in to speak about effective communication with children. I want to see a show of hands. Who here has a child or children in high school? Okay, that's a good number. How about middle school? And then upper elementary, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and then younger elementary. I guess I should redo this. I'm talking about your eldest child. So maybe some people are raising their hands and they were raising their hands for each of the 3. So of your eldest child, who here has children in younger elementary? So when I was asked to come and speak about communication to children, I felt a little uncomfortable because I'm a 6-year-old parent. My son Abdullah is 6 years old, and my other son, my second son Omar, is 2.5. So to come and tell you, who are more experienced and wiser than me about communicating with children, I felt a little uncomfortable. But just to level set as to what we're speaking about today and what I can bring, is that I did grow up here. I am an ABCD, right? I grew up I went to public school I went to kindergarten at Islamic Foundation, so that foundation was set, and then I went to public school all the way until high school. And then I went to 3 different universities, I graduated, I'm professional, I have a family and kids now, so I went through that, and I think that's something that I can bring because I've gone through this whole American Muslim, Desi Muslim, 2nd generation Muslim experience, but now I'm a father. So, I mean, I used to be involved with ICN a lot 5 years ago. I'm 31, so when I was 25, 26, I was the guy speaking to the 13-year-olds, the 16-year-olds. I was able to connect because I was just 10 years older. Now, since I'm past 30, I'm considered old. I know that sounds funny. I don't think I'm old, personally, but I don't think I'm young either. I'm in this strange in-between land where I'm not in my 20s, I'm not yet 40, but when I turn 30, I realized, wow, next is 40. That's, inshallah, we'll get there. But I'm in a strange position because I'm no longer, people say, oh, you connect with the youth and all that. I'm an old guy, I'm like Ruda Baba to them because I work, I commute, I have to think about buying a house. The moment I say I have kids, high schoolers don't listen to me anymore. It's not the same. But I think now I can start to relate with all of you in the room a little bit, inshallah. So what I want to do is just share my experiences from parenting for like 5 to 6 years. And then I'm involved with people, I'm connected with people that specialize in this, that they're imams, they're scholars, they're counselors. So in the past few weeks I've been talking to them, getting tips from them. What is it that we should know and we should focus on when we're communicating with our children, inshallah? Any questions before we start? Anything? Before I call people? I know a few people. Anyway, we'll start, inshallah. So bismillah. So number one, what I've learned as a parent is you have to be positive. And what I've done is I've come up with 5 things, right? So 5 things that I've learned, which are communication tips, over the course of 5 to 6 years. And this is also stuff that I've found on journals, on research websites, on basic parenting websites, but all of them have been backed up by research-based studies, because any and everyone can just put whatever they want on the internet. The proof for this is just go to any of their WhatsApp groups, see those crazy forwards, right? Like, if you drink cold bani at 2 a.m., you're going to get cancer. None of that is true. unless it's substantiated by research. So anything I put up here is substantiated by research, inshallah. So number one I've learned as a parent is you have to be positive in the way you communicate with your children if you want them to communicate with you in a positive way. So speaking with a nice tone. I learned when my kid was 2 to 3 that he may speak in a not so positive tone, and we would tell him, please speak nicely. We always say, speak nicely. So he'd say something, I want this, or I need it. Say it nicely. And he would respond by saying, nicely. He thought we were telling him to say the word nicely. Eventually he got the idea that he'd say, Abba, can I have this, please? We're still working on it. It's called name, can, please. Say the person's name, say can, have it, and then say please. Usually we get 2 out of 3 and we're happy, inshallah. But what I realized is, where is he getting this sometimes that negative tone from? It was from potentially myself, or maybe my spouse. That if we say something in a certain tone, they're going to say it the same way. So that modeling takes place. Also, criticism. I can tell my children that what they're doing is either good or bad. So one example that comes up, as a Muslim father, you want them to pray. I take my kids to the masjid. I go to this masjid called
Alaikum. Teachers, please note that first period has ended and second period has begun. Thank you.
I go to a masjid called ICOBT. Anyone ever been there before? Yes. It's Islamic Center of Oak Brook Terrace. Think of Olsen Masjid, but it's in Oak Brook Terrace. And I take my kids there. I have to arrive at the 4th rak'ah of Isha, basically. Maybe 3rd, if I'm lucky. Because Abdullah, he's older, he'll pray next to me. Omar's 2.5, will come, he'll join. Within 3 milliseconds, he's on the minbar. And he's pounding his feet. And he's making a lot of noise. Alhamdulillah, all the uncles there are really nice, so they don't mind if it happens. But what's interesting is, after Salah, Abdullah will turn to me and he'll ask me, how did he do? He's looking around, he's doing this, he's doing that. My mind instantly wants to tell him, you weren't looking down. You were talking to that kid in front of you, and that kid was trying to talk to him, so I want to tell that kid to stop talking too. But I think about all the negative things that he did. And sometimes I would tell him that right away, but people advise me, don't do that. Compliment, that positive speaking. Tell him what he did that's good. He's 6 and he's coming to the masjid and praying. That's a big deal. So I learned that if I want to have him speak positively to me, I have to compliment him. And then if I need to criticize, I can do that, but there has to be the complimenting first. Loving and positive names. This is something that my mother-in-law taught me. Yes, a husband is allowed to learn from the mother-in-law. I learned this in the past 6 years. Recently, actually it was right when my son was born, the first son. This is like 2010. She told me, don't ever call your children by bad names. And she gave examples. Some people will say, shaitan hai, or sometimes they say shaitan ka bacha, right? Doesn't that just insult you? Because then it means you're a shaitan. But she said, give them good words and then call them by nice names. And then she said, always say you're a good boy, you're a good girl. Even if they mess up, or maybe potentially when they mess up. Because those names and words will stick with them. So positive speaking continuously, being affectionate, saying that you love them. I know I grew up in a South Indian household. The words I love you were only uttered on the television. They weren't uttered in the household. Right? But from my wife's side, they're from Pakistan. My father-in-law came here when I was 17. Different house, different style. They're very, very affectionate with their words as well. So I learned that when I got married, that families are different. And now for my kids, we'll be at my mother's house, my mother and father are there. My son will come up and be like, Abba, Ammi, I love you. I never grew up with that. But this is his culture, this is their culture, and now really it's mine too. I respond with the same thing, and this is actually from the Sunnah, as we'll get to. So being affectionate, being positive, and the last thing for being positive is praising your children. I remember all of our friends growing up, let's say ACTs are coming. Anyone with children who are going to take their SATs, ACTs? Okay. So one guy I know, he got like a 34 out of 36. And we were all like, wow, you're going to get into Northwestern, you're going to go to USC, Harvard, whatever. He said that when he went home and told his parents the score, what do you think they asked? His father asked him. Yeah, where's the other two? And then we kind of joked about it, but it's a little bit sad that he was never actually told good job. And that's something that actually plays a role in the development of children, that positive praise should be there. Now, you don't want to go overboard, right? And research specialists talk about this, that you're amazing, you're so handsome, you're so beautiful, you're this, that. Then that praise is just empty because it happens all the time. But when they deserve it, praise them. And I learned this with my kids too, that if I praise their good behavior, they're more likely to do that, inshallah. The second thing I've learned is you have to listen. You have to give good, full attention. Normally what's going to happen is I come home from work, I'm a little bit tired, my wife is exhausted, so then it's my turn to basically become, like super abba and handle the children. They want to tell me any and everything, like Power Rangers this, my friend at school that, and then the little one's going to try to say the same stuff, but you can barely understand him. And while they're speaking, my wife wants to tell me something, and then, I think guys know this, all my friends on 7 different WhatsApp groups are having the most amazing conversations about the Cubs, about Sheikh so-and-so, about this halal restaurant. And naturally, my attention turns to all these people who are tens of hundreds of miles away from me, but they're on my phone. I work in user experience design, so I help design apps and what apps look like, how they're laid out, how they interact on your phone. There's a psychology behind the red circle. You have the app icon, and then a red circle appears on it with a number. 1, 3, 4. It's letting you know that there's this many messages. They chose a color for that circle. What is it? It's red. Red is like emergency, it's 911, it's very important. You want so bad to check that. I learned that the more attention I give to that, that's teaching my kids that when they are teenagers and they have their own devices, which I need to get your advice on how I'm supposed to handle that, they're not going to pay attention to me because they have 7 messages, they have 15 likes, they have Snapchats to check. So I have to give my full attention if I want that attention too. And then allowing them to speak and accepting their feelings. This is twofold. One, I noticed that sometimes if I'm trying to have a conversation and it's disciplinary in nature, before the sentence even finishes, I'll conclude the sentence. No, this is what it is. And no, this is the reason why, because I said so. And then as I'm saying these things, I'm remembering maybe my own childhood or things that I've heard that make sure you don't do this. So that's one side of it. The other side is accepting their feelings. As a guy, as a man, you never really talk about feelings, especially as a Desi man, that doesn't exist. Like men we don't have that. We weren't built with feelings apparently. But with children, that was a joke, it's not true. The children, you need to understand that they feel something sometimes. So I'll give you an example. We bought our son, what was it? A raincoat. It's a Batman raincoat. It's like if I was 6, this would be the greatest thing ever. It looks like a Batman costume, and you can put the hood up. You basically it's like a Halloween costume. We don't celebrate Halloween, but it's like a Halloween costume every time it's raining. The raincoat I got was like the ugliest raincoat ever because parents just got whatever's on sale at Burlington Coat Factory. They're not going to go there and be like curating your costume and your wardrobe for you. So I got this for him. He's wearing it. He loves it. One day he comes home and he goes, I don't want to wear it. Why? Because Vinny, an Italian friend of his at school, said that is weird. My mind, I'm a man, so logically, like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a great thing. I wanted it when I was a kid. You should be grateful. You're not being grateful. You're this. My mind just went off. But he's just upset because somebody just said something about his jacket. So after like a few days of argumentation whenever it would rain, then I realized that I need to speak to him. Why did he say that? Or what did he say? And then it turns out he just said it in passing. Apparently this kid, Vinny, he makes a lot of comments to my son, and we've talked to him about it, how to handle it, how to understand it. Now, when those comments are made, it's no longer much of an issue. And then we were able to speak to him and say, look, even if he says that, what about all the other students? They're not saying it, and is it true? How did it make you feel? He said it made me feel upset. But only after I realized that behind the logic, as a man looking at what's the logical explanation, and this doesn't really, it's not true, it's not factual, it doesn't make sense. When I just heard his feelings, then it was a little bit easier for him to digest. So listening as much as you can. 3, we're going to fly by these because we should make it more discussion oriented, so when I finish, then we can open it up. 3 is that nonverbal communication is real. So, eye contact. You have to make sure you're looking at the person you speak to. And that's, for me, is like when they're asking me questions, I'm like, yeah, okay, go ahead. But I'm reading something else. They can see, am I paying attention to you or to my phone? Or to whatever else that I'm doing, if I'm in the kitchen or if I'm upstairs or whatever it is. Speaking at the child's level. So my kids are young, so I have to sometimes get down and then be at the same height as them. I'm sure if my kids were in high school, I wouldn't have to do that. They'd probably be taller than me. My in-laws they're half Punjabi, and I'm South Indian. So I'm average height. I know my kids are going to be taller than me, inshallah. But maybe then I have to step on a step stool just to talk to them. But that understanding that even that physical difference between you exists, when you take that into account and you come to their level, wherever that might be, so if they're sitting, you might sit by them. If they're at the kitchen table and you're somewhere else, you come to them, they will appreciate that. And then things like open posture. My wife would let me know, right? I wish my wife was just here and she could just say everything. Like, he does all these things that are not good, and he does these few things that are good, and then we'd have a good discussion, inshallah. But she would let me know, your arms are crossed. When you're telling him that he can't have 3 Oreos, you can only have 2. Uncross your arms. Because, well, it looks like I'm praying, but if you're crossing your arms, it shows that you're defensive. You're in an argumentation mode. Even something as simple as opening your arms can communicate to them that it's not that big of a deal. We're not fighting, we're not arguing, we're just talking about an Oreo. It's like 50 calories or something. Example of it. Tone, gestures, and proximity. So your tone, I noticed that when you grew up, young, Desi American, second generation kids, we always said, we're never going to be like our dads, ever. They're so backwards, they're so like emotionless, they say things to the point, they never talk. Then you have a kid, and you're the exact same way. So I noticed that my tone would always be so authoritative. Just because I'm like the head of the household doesn't mean I have to always be like the judge and jury and the executioner. I can make my tone more open. So I noticed that my tone was more nicer, and there was an inflection. There's research done that if you inflect your voice, it goes higher sometimes, it goes lower, basically showing that you're not trying to take over and take charge, you're working with them, they become more responsive. Talked about gestures, which is like open posture and whatnot, and then proximity, how close you are when you speak. So one thing when I was a teenager, my mom wanted me to wake up. She knew how to do it. She would stand at the bottom of the stairs and yell my name. That drove me insane, but I'd get up. So she understood that if you come closer, and then she'd see me, I'd be all snuggled up, so then even though she wants me to wake up, she'd probably still put the blanket on me, you know, we're told you'll leave, you have to go. But then there'd be that niceness. But she knew from far away, if you yell the name, he's gonna get up because that kind of irritates him. So what I did, I learned that, and I realized that if I want to have that more intimate conversation, understand that if I'm going to yell it from far away, I'm going to irritate my kids. Go closer. When there's something heated that's going to happen, and you know it's a contentious conversation, that's when you start to practice these things. Eye contact, getting close, so on and so forth. 2 more. This one's a fun one. Mind the gap. Okay, there's multiple gaps here. Number 1 is going to, so we have generational, cultural, and digital. That's the fun one. So generational, obviously, is a different generation. It's not, I'm guessing for most of you, it's not the 70s. When did everyone grow up here? The 70s or 80s? 80s? If I say 70s, you'll be like, come on, we're not that old. We would tell our parents, for the first 2, generational and cultural, Ammi, Daddy, it's not India 1982. It's Chicago 2001. And that kind of irked them, because they knew we were right. That this is a different time. You came from another country. You don't know what it's like going to high school here, going to college here, driving on Butterfield. Like you were in Bangalore, India. What do you know about life here? So there's that generational gap that exists because we're older, but also the cultural gap too. For me, I thought, okay, when I become a parent, I'm not gonna have that because I'm born and raised here, so I'll be fine. And I realized that I'm completely wrong. That it actually can backfire on you. That my parents were fine, from another generation, everyone's parents are. They're from another culture, but I had the understanding too as a kid that they don't really get it, but I appreciate what they're doing. With my kids, they see that, okay, he's older, generational gap, but the culture is the same. He should get where I'm coming from. So I thought it would be an advantage. It's actually almost a disadvantage. Being cool and like part of the generation, understanding, it's almost like you should know better, father, because you're from here. So either way, there's always that cultural and generational gap. The digital gap is what's big for us. I grew up in a time when technology was becoming the norm for our lives. So for me, I'm really into technology. I'm kind of like a nerd. And I remember getting broadband, right? Getting DSL, getting cable modem, getting cable TV, all these types of things. I remember when YouTube, actually, us and some of our friends, we were the first ever to upload a video on YouTube of Sheikh Yasser Qadhi 10 years ago. If you searched back then, you'd find nothing. Now, if you search, your computer is overloaded. It was a concept that we came up with. Like, hey, YouTube is this new thing. It's a year old this time. Let's upload a lecture on there. So we grew up into this. And I remember for me, 1994, we had Sunday school at IFS. Saturday was a time when you just leave us alone because there's a lot of cartoons to watch. My favorite cartoon was Spider-Man, 1994. Every Saturday, 9 a.m., I had to catch it. Because it wasn't a syndication, which means Monday through Friday they play after school. It was only premiere Saturday mornings on Fox. I remember once, my dad said you have to vacuum. I was 9. I can't imagine what that would be like if I said it to my kid when he's 9. He'd probably just say no. But I vacuumed, and I missed Spider-Man, and I was so upset and so angry. Later, when I caught that episode, it was a garbage episode anyway. It didn't even make a difference. But my kids, they don't have that concept. Because Spider-Man is on Netflix all 6 seasons. So there's no, I have to wait until Saturday and Monday. It's, I want to watch 4 episodes of that. No, you can only watch 2. Totally different generational gap here because of the digital change that's there. And that's something you have to come to terms with and accept. And a lot of people will look at this and say, technology is horrible, it's changing all of us, it's making our families not talk to each other. But if we kind of embrace it, understand it for what it is, I think that's better. And this happens, like I'm in my 30s, young 30s. That's all we talk about. We had this, at your cousin's place, Jawad's place, we got together, all our college friends, and then for the first time, in the other room, obviously, all the wives, and then all the kids upstairs. So it was like a college party, but post-family, like a 10-year reunion. All we talked about after the Cubs won was how do we raise our kids? TV, it's okay, let him run. It's okay, he should be doing that. I remember once Noman gave a talk at IFS and the kid was in the front, and everyone got up and he's like, leave him, let him do what he needs to do. So after that, it's like, it's fine. He's not even making a sound in the film. He threw away his garbage. He should be on the mic right now. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make him somebody went to Jannah and his whole family. I mean, so, where was I? I'm trying to remember now. Somebody remind me where I was. Say it again?
Talking about
okay, this is dawah. This is like our first Uncle Dawah. It's been a long time. And all we were talking about is how to raise kids, TV, public school, private school. These are things that maybe all of you have already figured out. We're the new parents, and we don't know what to do, and we're scared. But one of the biggest things was screen time control. Some person says 2 hours, some person says we have no TV, some person says their kids are addicted and they have no choice. So I see that in our generation, sub-generation, we haven't figured it out. And a lot of people are just completely anti-technology because they're scared. We knew that growing up into it, our kids were born with it. I found that embracing it is kind of the best route. And if my son can limit himself, my kids can limit themselves with all the access in a way that's better than what I grew up with. Because I was forced to wait till Saturday. But if on a weekly basis or weeknight basis, my kids can limit themselves day to day, that actually makes them stronger, I think. So understanding that they have a different time, a different experience, different generation, and kind of using that to my advantage. The last thing I'll talk about is modeling behavior. So, great cute picture. I think it got cut off, but that's a father, grandfather, and then a little baby. So, it's, I mean, for those of you who have older children, you might have forgotten what this age is like, but our younger one, Umar, he models everything that we say and do. And we had some guests over just a couple nights ago, and my wife asked, would you like Coke or water? And the guest said, I'll take a Coke, please, thanks. And then 2.5-year-old Umar says, me, I'll take a Coke, please, thanks. It was all mumbled and baby-like. It was really funny. So communicating with them the way you want them to speak to you. This is kind of what we talked about in the beginning. I can't expect them to speak in this perfect, ultimate, like Quranic way of speaking to your parents if I don't speak the same way to them. I've noticed that our younger one, Umar, I feel bad because when you get up and speak about your family, it's like you're just letting it all out. But I'm just sharing with you our experiences. I've noticed Umar will say, gosh, he's 2. He drinks doo-doo from a bottle. Like, why is he saying gosh? Because we might say that. Very interesting story. I used to play at my mother's house, my parents' house. I have a younger brother. He still plays video games, and he'll have something like Mario. We all grew up with Mario, so I would play. He'd get the latest one, I'd keep playing and keep playing. And Abdullah then was 3, my older one. And when I would lose a level, I would say what I would say in high school, which is D-A-M-N-I-T. And I'm 28. It's just an old habit, never died. Abdullah's there. He starts playing. He falls off in Mario. Take a wild guess what word he says. In Daddy's house. Right? And I'm the Khatib guy. My kid is swearing. This is crazy. And that's when we realize, like, we have kids now. Number 1, we have to be careful. Number 2, it's time to grow up. Stop using this language. You're not a high schooler anymore, right? So if I want them to speak a certain way, I have to model that or act a certain way. But we're talking about communication. And then speaking in life. So when you're with your children, you say certain things, you do certain things. But then when you are on the phone, or guests are over, or you're just at the masjid, or you're driving and someone cuts you off, what you say, they're going to do the same thing. And then I'm married now, so how you speak with your in-laws, how you speak about your in-laws. My wife, she's been teaching in Islamic schools for 7, 8 years, and she told me, she's from Michigan. Her first job here was at Foundation. I just say it out loud, I don't care. So she came from Michigan to Chicago. Typical Chicago student she's teaching at Foundation, first year. So when she moved here, she's living in my parents' house. And we lived there for 2 years. Alhamdulillah, she never complained. Until we were about to have a kid, she's like, I think it's time I have my own space. So Mel rewarded her for that. But when she was teaching at IFS, first year, she introduces herself, they get to know each other. 8th grade class, 13-year-olds. She explains, I live in Lyle with my in-laws. 13-year-old girl raises her hand and says, Miss, what is that like? She's like, what do you mean? She's like, you know, mother-in-laws, aren't they just crazy? And she has a chance to like defend her new mother-in-law at this point. She just cuts the conversation off and says, no, she's not anything like that. We have a great relationship, and I live with them. It's no big deal. But her reflection was, where in the world is this 13-year-old Muslim girl getting this? That mother-in-laws are insane. She's not married. She probably won't be for another 8 to 10 years. Because she's modeling what others say. It's not that potentially her mother or her father or elders came and told her in-laws are like this. She overheard that, and for 13 some years potentially, she's had that drilled into her head. And then we ask, why is the divorce rate so high in our communities? Because literally what we're communicating in life, our children pick up on that. So I learned that I have to be very careful in what I say and do and how I communicate with others, even if I'm not speaking to my kids. And the last thing I want to mention about modeling is apologizing. It's very hard as a parent when you realize you're completely wrong and your kids know it. When they're babies, it's like, oh, I messed up, but he's a diaper change, no big deal. Now, it's like I made a mistake about a decision or something that was in the family or some sort of plan, and I knew I should have said the other thing, and now my kid knows it too. So, as a boastful, proud, like headline of the household, I can just be like, oh, okay, no big deal. Or I can apologize. And it's hard as a parent, it's hard as a father to do that, it's hard as a husband to do that, if you know what I'm talking about. But when you do, there's a lot of studies on this, that apologizing to your kids teaches them to apologize as well. Because they model it. They see that you're imperfect. And then the craziest thing I read was that psychologists left and right wrote, they love when parents are wrong. And that kills you inside. I don't want to show you that I'm wrong. But they love it because it shows that you're not perfect. And you're allowed to make mistakes. So that when they make mistakes, they're more likely to apologize. These are 5 things that I learned. We're going to flip it now and look at how these 5 things existed in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Any questions before we go there? Any comments? Again, I'm the new person. You're the experienced people, so let me know. Just raise your hand and say you're wrong. Yes.
I don't know whether I can just ask you a question too. Alhamdulillah, I'm a father of 3 kids. My older one is in high school. So I thought I had, alhamdulillah, kind of good patience until my older son grew up. So he's the one, he's about 14 years, he's in high school. So alhamdulillah, he asks me the most difficult questions that I can think of. And so alhamdulillah, I learned quite a lot. One question I had was, you mentioned about the gap, right? The gap between father and son. And I'm a person who, grew up playing video games. I like video games. I played all the Mario games. And I thought that would be a good way for me to connect with him. So I played games when he was growing up. But now, he talks about PS4 and all the other games. And I'm a person, as I told you, I like video games. But when I look at all the new games, like Grand Theft Auto or Mafia or many of the new games, so they are, I don't think I would like to play them with my kids, or I would encourage them. So how should I handle it? I'm a person who likes technology, but how can we address that part where the games are not that good anymore?
So it's a good question for us. If we wanted to play like bad video games, just go play it because my parents weren't paying attention, or our systems were upstairs, or you'd be on your computer. Like, what are you doing? I'm doing homework, and I'm playing Metal Gear Solid, right? Allah forgive me. So the trick is you, mashallah, are trying to do this as a family, as a father and son type of activity. We just, what we try to do in our household is let him know that there are certain things that are good for our hearts and not good for our hearts. So, and this is completely unrelated, so don't assign this example to video games, but the issue of halal and haram. When it's brought up in the house, we were advised by our teachers that don't tell them something is halal or haram per se, only tie it to this is what pleases Allah and doesn't please Allah. So that way when they hear these rules or these terms, there's a reason why, and then they're allowed to ask and think about it. So my son is 6. Power Rangers Dino Thunder, or whatever it's called, is TVY7. He wants so bad to watch it. And guess who watches it? His cousins who are 6 and 5. Well, so-and-so watches in their house. You're not 7. In our house, we don't watch it. Why? Because there's things in there that are not good for our hearts. I'm not like, oh, that I figured it out. It was like a shot. We threw it out there to see if it works. He got quiet. And when we walked over, like, yes, we found a reason to explain that you shouldn't be watching certain things. So it's difficult when they're 14 because in high school, rated M for mature games are, I think, rated 17. Kids are playing that at age 9, 8. So if it's established in the house that in this home, we don't consume media that's bad for our hearts, those distinctions of age and rating, which are all arbitrary and regulated by the government, won't even come up. So if we're watching the Bulls game, for example, or the Cubs, and it's time for commercials, you hit menu, so it goes to like the guide twice. So it goes from a clear guide, a see-through, to an opaque guide, and you hit mute. So there's no beer commercials, there's no girl, like weird women commercials, dating commercials, etc. So you're watching, you're consuming media, but you're filtering out what's bad. So I think having it set in the household that we do certain things, but there's other things we don't do. Why? Because it's not good for our hearts. That's something that helps us, inshallah. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move through these and then we'll open it up, inshallah. So, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, how did he do these 5? So we talked about speaking positively. He spoke positively to children. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu was a young Sahabi in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And he told us later, after the fact, and this is recorded in authentic traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, that he served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years. And he said about him, he never said oof, meaning to Anas. So Anas is a boy that's always with the Prophet. He's kind of getting older and growing with him until he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said he was with him for 10 years. Imagine spending that time, not like a year or two at the end of Medina, 10 years. 10 years was the duration of the Medina period of the Sirah. So for all of Medina, Anas is growing up with the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that in a whole decade, he never told him oof. And oof in Arabic is basically showing a sign of contempt or being frustrated with somebody. So as this older figure to a younger child, he said it never happened. And he said he never blamed me by saying, why did you do so or why didn't you do so? So this idea of speaking positively, yeah, it's in journals and research and psychological studies, is from the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it urges us to ask, can we have this happen to our children? That they can say, in my growing up, my parents never said oof to me and they never asked me, why didn't you do this, why did you do that? I know the answer is a resounding no, but there's a model that we can follow, and that's the tradition of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 2 is that he listened. Talk about listening attentively. So there was this young boy named Abu Umair. They used to name their kids sometimes by the kunya style name, like Abu Bakr, Abu Umair. So there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Abu Umair, ma fa'ala an-Nughair. Oh Abu Umair, what did an-Nughair do? An-Nughair was the name of this young boy's bird. The bird died. And somehow the Prophet ﷺ learned about it. He went to go visit the child, and he asked him basically, what was this bird all about? Tell me about it. And he explained that the child explained he died, but it was my pet, and I used to do this, I used to do that. And he listened to a child about what he used to do with his pet. And it's later mentioned in the narration that he would take Abu Umair out, and especially specifically after this, and play with him in the streets of Medina. I am hard-pressed to remember an example of maybe a imam or like religious figure that I can remember growing up that would come down and speak to our level as children on an emotional level. And it's not like I had my pet die or something where I can remember things like this. But it's hard to envision this, that someone who's the prophet of God and entitled to rule the entire world essentially can come down and speak to a boy about his pet bird dying. So when we scale it down to the people who are in charge of the household, the parents, we can listen to our children because we have this example. If he can humble himself down to the feelings of a child, which are very important, it's not like it's something that's not big, that's something that we can do too. 3 is that he understood, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, non-verbal communication. So it's mentioned in Shama'il. Shama'il are the characteristics and attributes of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when he would speak to people, he would turn to them completely and give them their full attention. And this is related to us by Ibrahim ibn Muhammad, who is one of the descendants of Ali radiallahu anhu. So you have this description of the Prophet ﷺ. He was nice, he would smile, he looked a certain way. Even his non-verbal communication was recorded, and in that there is benefit too. So that when our children are speaking to us, who are more important than anybody else, we should follow the sunnah of turning to them. And it makes a lot of difference too. 4 is he understood the gap. An example that's not on the screen is that when he's in Mecca, and Islam is basically being attacked, it's trying to be like forced out of Medina, they're trying to kill believers and torture them and drive out Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At one point, he sends a delegation, an emissary to Medina to tell the people about Islam. You would think he's going to send like Abu Bakr, Umar radiallahu anhu, or like some of these top official-like people who are aristocratic in nature and can talk to people. He sends Mus'ab ibn Umair, who is basically like a high schooler. And he was known as one of the most popular people. He was very good looking. He came from a very wealthy family. And he has an incredible story as being a young Muslim person. But he knew the potential of this generation that was there. He sent Mus'ab. Because of Mus'ab, after the fadl of Allah, a lot of the people of Medina were already Muslim and ready to accept him as the leader of Medina when he entered the city a couple months or a year later. So he understood that there is a generational gap. Maybe sending an older wouldn't be the best thing to do. Sending someone who's young and can appeal to a lot of people. He recognized that. But one quote that's very famously attributed to Imam Ali radiallahu anhu is, "Don't raise your children the way your parents raised you. They were born in a different time." And it's amazing how this person who lived 14 centuries ago is stating this. And I used to assume that when they lived back then, their generational gaps were probably very small because life wasn't moving so fast. But if he's saying this, he's recognizing that. And if he's saying it, he's the cousin of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's coming with that same mindset. So understanding it is from the Sunnah. And the last thing which we'll mention is that he was a model, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That Allah calls him in the Quran, uswatun hasana. He is the prime and excellent example and pattern to follow. And for all these different tips, all this research, all these different advices, sometimes it just comes down to being that prophetic person in your household and with your children. That can go a long way. If I act like the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my kids are going to probably, hopefully, potentially act like that too, and that model can continue. So these are things that I have learned. Now I need to ask for your help because, again, I'm only a 6-year-old parent. What can you tell me, inshallah?
So I have mashallah 3 boys. Someone in my family when I was, when I had the first one.
Sure.
When I had my eldest son, someone in my family told me that if you raise him well, the rest will follow. So this is like just giving an advice that if you have given more time to your eldest one, the younger ones will always try to mimic the older one. And he's mashallah 11, and everything he does, and mashallah is a very good kid, but the other two always try to follow him. So a good idea is to spend more time with the eldest one because the rest will follow what he's doing, and inshallah they'll be following the same path.
3 boys? So how would that work? That's excellent advice, and I need that because I need to get to your level. I went 2 so far, inshallah. And I've seen that. So for example, Abdullah can turn the TV off. This is the best thing in the house, right? Off, TV's off finally. If I ask him to do it, Omar literally pushes him out of the way and turns it off, and they're fighting to turn off the TV. And I feel like I've won the world because they're fighting to turn the TV off.
Sure.
But it's actually not very good. But it's only because I told his older brother to do it. So I think that's a very valid point. But what about the dynamic of having different genders of siblings? How would that work? The eldest is maybe a boy, and then the youngers are girls, or vice versa. The eldest is a girl, and then the younger boy. Any tips or advice? They don't get along? We want a girl next, inshallah.
My youngest is a girl, and she always tells me, "Can we donate to brothers and get 2 sisters?" But they will. They're older. I hope so.
But I'm sure that advice still is there. Maybe at first it won't be that way, but if the eldest is a different gender and they grow up righteous, that's just going to play a role, inshallah. Because when I realized, and I said, oh, I'm not old, I'm not young. My friends' parents are passing away. And that's something I never thought about. It would be like my older cousins, or not really uncle, not really cousin type, like Pai or like Abba type figures. Oh, their father passed away. Oh, he was very old, 70s, 80s. Now my college friends, their parents are passing away. So that's when it hit me that we really do need to raise these kids right, because after 30, 40, like, you're just going to die soon eventually, right? Allah allow us, it sounds crazy, but Allah allows us to live long lives of worship. I realized that you have to raise these kids right, especially the eldest, because eventually you're not going to be there anymore.
Excuse me. Actually, we should not take it for granted. It is very essential, but not sufficient. Because every child is different,
Yes.
especially on the gender, the age, and the generational difference. So we need to work on each one.
Are you saying don't take for granted?
Yes,
Raising the
no,
first
you-
one right will make the rest okay?
No, I mean, you said you spend more time to raise the eldest, and then the rest will follow. Sometimes it's a big mistake.
Yeah,
Or
and
assumption, I would say.
As it was mentioned, the counterexample came into my head of somebody I know very close, where it was actually the younger sibling who's basically out of the house at age 19, has a girlfriend, and family's all up in the masjid. Dad prays Fajr every day, but the eldest is really good, the youngest is not. I think it's more of a guideline that
Yeah.
you strive for, because you're starting there, and because you're a role model, but sometimes the older sibling is like a parent too. So what was mentioned here, but it has to be balanced by what's mentioned.
Right. I feel like in the starting time, first 10 years, it's more challenging. I'll give a very simple example, because when it's bedtime and they don't want to go upstairs, they want to see the TV or they want to do whatever, the eldest goes and the rest will just follow. It comes into my mind from that perspective, but of course there are challenges, and as soon as they're in their teens, they will all have different personalities, and you have to work with them on different levels.
We just turn the lights off. But Omar's not old, tall enough to turn it back on, so I'm sure when they're older that doesn't work. See, I think I'm so smart, but it's not.
Yeah, I can add a bit in that your elder sibling, you can also educate him that you are also a role model. So although he's young, but still if he acts as if, okay, he has a responsibility as well towards his younger siblings, probably he will start acting more as an adult. You can see even in the childhood that, okay, I have to do something good so that my younger brother or sister can pick from me, not from my parents.
I found myself telling my older one, you have to make sure you do that because Omar's watching you. But then I have to tell myself, like, this kid's 6, like, that's a lot to ask of him. So I want to ask you, at what point should someone like me who has a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old realize that you can't really expect a lot out of these kids in terms of behavior and expectations? When does that change? Or are your children not there yet either? Everyone's looking down.
No, I'm trying to think, because it's been very long
Okay.
since my kids were that age.
Well, I don't think it changes, right? I think you start expecting more as they get older. So if it does change, I think the expectations of them becoming better Muslims change.
So it's a gradual process.
Absolutely.
I think I just want to add a few points on that. I know we were discussing, and there were very great points about the older sibling. If we spend more time, and alhamdulillah, me and my wife had spent a lot of time with my older son. Alhamdulillah, he's very good. But I would say that sometimes there are things that every kid is different. Their personalities are completely different. So he would ask you the most toughest of questions, and we thought that we were with those questions we will be prepared enough. So
Would you mind sharing an example of a question, if it's that you can't share?
I think there are so many questions that I can think of.
I need to know what to expect, basically.
I mean, he would ask you like many requests at the same time. Like can I have a cat? Can I have a dog? Can I have a gecko lizard? So he would ask you so many questions at the same time, and you have to pick and choose and tell them why. He puts you so many things.
Just interview training for your next position, Michelle.
And then we have to kind of address all those questions. But I don't know that my younger kids, they are very good. I mean, they don't ask all those questions, they follow along. So I think along that way, we did a lot of good things that they know what to do. So they do their chores at home, and they are pretty good. But my older son, he's the rebel one. He would say, I don't want to do this chore. I can do only this, I can do only that. So it's quite challenging, the older one, he still is.
So it's been all brothers so far. Let's take this sisters.
So one of your challenging questions, ever since the kids were little, we realized it connected with Allah when the kids were little. So they saw us as a family connected to Allah. And I used to go to a lot of Al-Naperville classes, so I tried to be a good, an expert parent, or as much as I could. But now, my 14-year-old will say things like, what's the proof God is real? Like, even though, and I have to really calm myself down. He knows it in his heart, but because he doesn't want to follow the lifestyle, and of course public school is so exciting, and high school is so exciting, that now he will ask, so what's your proof that God is real? Why, what do you mean by not? And so, those are that we thought we could handle those, but
wow. Actually, she brought a good point, because parents, we are like a small portion in their life.
yes.
We have like the other external and environmental or peer pressure.
Yes. I remember telling my parents, school is not 100% classes. They were blown away. I don't know where I came up with this statistic, but I thought it sounded so smart. It said, Ami's 80% social, 20% school. And she got quiet, I went upstairs, it felt amazing, and then I probably didn't do my homework that day or something. But it was true. Like, I know growing up, public school was, the only reason I really wanted to go was because I could see all my friends. Yes?
And kind of related to that point, I kept thinking throughout the presentation, we talk about modeling behavior and we're talking about communicating. The environment is also communicating with your children. So it's the company we keep, and I think that plays a huge role. So I'll give an out there example. You're telling your kids don't watch garbage, don't listen to garbage, yet you are watching the Bollywood at home. Sorry for Bollywood fans.
I don't like Bollywood.
We don't do Bollywood either, but I mean, as a parent, you set a standard, right? You say, well, that's okay for me, it's not okay for you. And in a lot of homes, if you don't walk the walk and your kids get older, and it can be little things too, but the company and the company you allow them to keep is huge. And with the first child, you set the tone. So if I don't allow my eldest to do X, Y, Z with their non-Muslim friends, the other two don't even try and ask.
What about boys versus girls?
I don't have any boys, I only have girls, but I would say that they're closer than you think.
We should ask them. I remember by the time I hit 18, I could come home at 12 or 1. And I just get down to a little bit, just take it. They're gonna go back to sleep, I'm online till 3. Maybe I'll catch Fajr, hopefully. But my wife said the moment Maghrib hit, you had to be home, like in your pajamas. It's like, but Maghrib's at 4:20 in the winter, you gotta be home. I'd be out till like 2 or 3 with your cousin, like do whatever I want. And I'd respond like, well, I'm in the masjid, I'm doing something good. It doesn't matter.
But that builds resentment between the siblings.
We had all boys.
Yeah, so we have all girls, and I grew up with all girls, and I have to say, alhamdulillah, I did grow up with a father who never said oath to this day in my life. Alhamdulillah, may Allah reward him and protect him. But you have to be very careful when you make those differences between boys and girls. If we don't think it's right for a girl to live in a dorm, we should probably be thinking why, and think about that first.